I found the camera on a rainy Saturday morning in the back corner of an old flea market by the docks. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find anything valuable, just cracked glass bottles, rusted tools, yellowed books that smelled of mold and sadness. But there it was, half buried under a pile of broken toys, an old box camera with worn leather edges and brass fittings dulled by time. At first glance, it looked like every other relic you might find at an antique shop, but something about it felt deliberate, like it had been waiting. When I picked it up, it felt strangely heavy in my hands, as if it carried more than just mechanical parts inside. The stall owner barely looked up. $5, he muttered, his voice rough like gravel. I hesitated only a second before handing over the money. I told myself it would look great on my shelf, a conversation piece. I didn't realize that conversation would be with shadows. That night, I brought the camera home. My apartment was a cramped studio over a laundromat. The constant hum of dryers below had become white noise. I set the camera on the small table by the window. The rain hadn't stopped. Water streaked the glass, city lights smearing into gold and orange trails. I turned the camera in my hands. There were letters etched into the brass around the lens. Vide noctem. Latin, probably. My Latin was rusty, but it felt like it meant see the night or vision of the night. A chill prickled across my shoulders. I almost laughed it off. Almost. When I finally raised it to my eye and looked through the viewfinder, the apartment seemed different. The walls were the same, but shadows felt thicker, darker, like they had weight. And in the far corner of the room, by the wardrobe, I thought, just for an instant, that I saw someone standing there, watching me. But when I lowered the camera, the corner was empty. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was just reflection, old glass distorting shapes. I set the camera down and went to bed, trying not to look at the wardrobe. A week later, I took it outside. I'm a photographer by trade, nothing glamorous, mostly weddings, baby photos, real estate gigs. But I thought, maybe this relic could add a vintage feel to my portfolio. I loaded it with film, unsure if it even worked. The first picture I took was of a stray cat on a brick wall. The moment I clicked the shutter, I felt something, like a tug inside my chest. The cat's eyes widened just as I pressed the shutter. It bolted. When I developed the photo that evening, the picture was clear. Clearer than any photo I'd taken with modern cameras. But behind the cat, in the shadows, stood the silhouette of a tall man in an old-fashioned coat. The alley was empty. I was sure of it. I convinced myself it was an old poster on the wall, something I hadn't noticed. But that night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard the soft click of a shutter in the darkness. Once. Then silence. A few days later, I decided to photograph my neighbor, Mrs. Dwyer. She was kind to me, always leaving fresh muffins by my door. In her 80s, with a face full of gentle lines. When I raised the camera to capture her smile, her eyes shifted, just slightly, and her lips froze. I hesitated, but took the picture anyway. The next day, I heard she'd passed away in her sleep. The photos showed her standing in her kitchen, her body clear, but her face was gone, blurred into nothingness, as if the camera had swallowed it. I told myself it was a tragic coincidence, but in my chest, fear curled like a living thing. That weekend, I couldn't sleep. The camera sat on the shelf across the room, and I swear sometimes I heard faint whispers around it, like the rustle of dry leaves. Once I woke at 3 a.m. and saw the lens pointed directly at me, though I hadn't touched it. I packed it in a box, buried it under books and clothes, and shoved it into the back of my closet. But at dawn, when I stumbled to the kitchen for water, it was there on the table, looking right at me. Desperate for answers, I visited the flea market again. The stall where I'd bought it was empty, the table bare, except for dust. Other sellers claimed the old man had packed up and left weeks ago, but I'd seen him days before. I searched online for the camera's markings, forums, archives, old catalog scans. Finally, I found a single mention in an obscure blog about cursed objects. Vide Noctem, rumored to have belonged to a Victorian occult photographer, said to capture not just images, but the soul's shadow. Photos taken with it often reveal things unseen and demand payment. Payment. The word echoed in my skull. Then came the nightmares. I dreamed I was trapped behind glass, looking out through the viewfinder. Outside, people passed by, blurred and uncaring. My breath fogged up the glass, and behind me, in the darkness, something whispered my name. When I woke, my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wrong. My face, but older. Hollow eyes, skin drawn tight. I splashed water on my face until my reflection settled into what I knew. I tried to get rid of it. I left it on the subway, but that night it was back on my table. I threw it into the river. The next morning, it sat by my bed, dripping wet, leaving black watermarks on the wood. I smashed it with a hammer, but when I blinked, the camera lay whole again, unharmed. Weeks turned into months. I stopped seeing friends. My apartment grew dark, windows covered, photos of empty rooms pinned to the walls. Sometimes when I used the camera, I saw people I knew, my mother, my old school friend, standing in places they couldn't possibly be. Each photo brought them closer. Each night, whispers grew louder. I barely slept. Food lost its taste. My skin felt thin, stretched over bones. And every time I dared to look through the viewfinder, the shadows moved, closer each time. One night, unable to fight the compulsion, I stood before the mirror with the camera. My hand shook as I raised it. Through the lens, my reflection smiled back, but I wasn't smiling. The shutter clicked. The whispers stopped. And in that silence, I realized something had left the mirror and stepped into the room. After that night, something changed in the air around me. The apartment felt colder, as if every corner harbored a presence I couldn't see. The camera itself sat silent on the table, but it felt alive, almost expectant, like a predator waiting for its prey to let down its guard. I avoided it at first. I tried to live normally, go to work, pick up groceries, nod at the neighbors, but my reflection haunted me. Every time I caught sight of myself in a window or a mirror, my eyes seemed a shade darker, my smile a little too wide, like a mask barely hiding something underneath. Then the dreams came again. In them I stood in an endless hallway, lined with mirrors, each reflecting not my face, but someone else's. People I'd known, people I'd photographed, some living, some dead. Their mouths moved silently, as if trying to warn me. But the words never reached my ears. At the far end of the hallway was always the camera, floating in darkness, its lens trained on me, and behind it, something moved. I could never see what, but its shape filled me with terror so raw I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat. One morning, driven by a mixture of fear and obsession, I decided to find out where the camera came from. I needed answers. I visited the city library's archive room, where the smell of old paper and ink was almost comforting. The librarian, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, helped me search. We combed through articles on antique photography, local estate sales, and private collections. At last, buried in the yellowed pages of a 1926 newspaper, I found something.
The headline read, "Photographer found dead among dozens of faceless victims." The article described a man named Edward Barrow, a reclusive photographer known for portraits that captured more than mere likeness. His final exhibition had been shut down when guests noticed something strange. Every subject in his photos was missing their face, replaced by a smudge of shadow. Edward was later found dead in his studio. The camera used to take those photos was missing, believed to be stolen. The article included a photograph of Edward himself standing next to the camera. The same boxy shape, the same brass letters etched around the lens. Vide noctem. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. That night, unable to help myself, I took the camera in hand again. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I needed to believe I still had control. I loaded fresh film and looked through the viewfinder. My apartment seemed as it always did, but the shadows by the kitchen doorway felt denser. I pressed the shutter. In that instant, the air seemed to ripple. I stumbled back, camera in hand, heart hammering. I developed the photo in the small dark room I'd set up in my bathroom. Under the red light, the image slowly emerged. My apartment, the doorway, and in the shadows, a figure. Pale face, empty eyes, its mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. It was me. But it wasn't. The face was mine, yet older, lifeless, hollow, like something drained of all warmth, all humanity. Days blurred into each other after that. I stopped going to work. I barely ate. My phone buzzed with worried messages from friends and family, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. All I could think about was the camera. At night, I heard the soft click of a shutter in the darkness. Once, twice. Each click felt like a heartbeat not my own. And the whispers grew clearer. I began to understand them, scraps of language, broken sentences. One more. It hungers. You know what you must do. Then something happened I couldn't ignore. My best friend, Tom, stopped by unexpectedly. He knocked, cheerful as ever, holding takeout and a grin. "Dude, you've gone dark on everyone," he said as I let him in. "Figured you might need food or at least a shower." We sat in awkward silence for a moment before I told him about the camera. He laughed at first, then saw the look on my face. "Okay," he said. "Show me." I hesitated,
but the camera felt heavy in my hands, almost pulsing with anticipation. Tom stood by the window, raising his beer in mock salute. I lifted the camera, my fingers trembling. "Ready?" I asked. "Fire away," he grinned. The shutter clicked. Tom flinched slightly, then shrugged. "Weird," he muttered. "Felt like a static shock." Hours later, Tom left. We promised to catch up soon. When I developed the photo, my blood turned to ice. Tom was there, smiling, but behind him, the shadowy figure from my earlier photo loomed closer, its face clearer now. Mine, but not mine. Twisted, cold, hungry. That night, Tom called me. His voice shook. "Man, I don't know what's wrong. Ever since you took that photo, I feel off, like something's watching me. I keep seeing things move in the corners." I wanted to tell him, warn him, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "I'm sorry," and hung up. The next morning, I got a call from Tom's sister. Tom had been found dead in his apartment, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. No signs of violence, no cause the doctors could explain. I knew, deep down, it was the camera and me.
The guilt tore at me, but beneath it, something darker pulsed. A thrill. The whispers praised me. For the first time, I understood. The camera fed on fear, on life, and it used me as its hand. Desperate, I tried to destroy it again. Fire, water, even smashing it against concrete. Every time it returned, whole, waiting. And each time it returned, the shadow in my photos grew clearer, more real. One night, I met an old woman who claimed to know its truth. I'd found her name in a dusty occult forum. Agatha Morrow, a collector of cursed relics. She agreed to meet in a crumbling tea shop near the edge of town. Her eyes were pale and clouded, but when she touched the camera, she recoiled. "It doesn't steal souls, child. It trades. Every photo you take, it takes a piece of you or someone else, and it gives back something that shouldn't exist." She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "And when your face fully appears in its photos, it's over. You become what's behind the lens, and something else takes your place. The shadows, the whispers, the face in my photos." It all made sense. That night, I made a choice. I turned the camera on myself, hands shaking. "Take it," I whispered. "Take whatever you want, but leave everyone else alone." I clicked the shutter. Pain exploded behind my eyes, my vision blurred, darkness swirling at the edges. When I woke, everything felt wrong. The room looked the same, but the colors were faded, washed out. I stumbled to the mirror. My face stared back, hollow, pale, eyes empty. And then my reflection smiled, even though I didn't. The whispers echoed in my head. "You're home now."
Darkness had become my companion. After that last photo, I wasn't sure if I was alive or something else. The world felt distant. Colors dimmed.
Sounds muffled, food tasteless. The only thing that still felt real was the camera, always near, always hungry. The whispers grew louder, shaping into words that made sense and yet made me want to scream. They spoke of others, of men and women before me who had held the cursed lens, feeding it life to keep themselves safe, until it claimed them too. At night, in the edges of my vision, I saw them, pale silhouettes lurking behind curtains, reflected in windows. Faces blurred but familiar, as though the camera had kept pieces of them trapped inside. Their eyes seemed to plead and accuse at once. Driven by terror and fascination, I traced the camera's path through decades. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. In 1952, a war photographer named Alan Croft had owned it. His letters, found in an auctioned trunk, described nightmares of faceless soldiers and photos developing themselves, each new shot darker than the last. His final letter ended mid-sentence. In the 1970s, it passed to a woman named Miriam Lowe, who ran a portrait studio. Clients began dying weeks after sitting for her. One night, she vanished, leaving behind only rows of photos, all subjects blurred into the same eyeless mask. The camera resurfaced again and again, passed in secret or stolen by those desperate enough to ignore the rumors. And now, it had me. My own photos grew worse. Each new picture showed less of the real world and more of that shadow place behind the lens, a labyrinth of cracked mirrors, crooked corridors, and endless doorways. And always, always, the watchers. Shapes that flickered closer every time. Once, while developing a photo, I saw my own face in it, staring back with a look of utter despair, mouth forming a word I couldn't read. Before I could tear up the photo, the whispers surged. Too late. Nights became a blur of fear and obsession. One evening, desperate, I stood by my window, the city lights flickering outside. I lifted the camera, telling myself it would be the last photo, proof of the truth, or a final surrender. I pressed the shutter. In that instant, the world around me peeled away. I was standing in that labyrinth from my nightmares, the place behind the lens. Cold air stung my skin. The ground felt like glass underfoot. Mirrors stretched into darkness on all sides, cracked and dirty. Shapes moved inside them, shadows of people, or what was left of them. They watched me, silent, accusing. Ahead, at the heart of the maze, stood a towering mirror. Its surface shimmered like black water. Drawn forward, I stepped closer. In the mirror, I saw myself, but not as I was now. Instead, it was the reflection that had haunted my photos, pale, empty-eyed, smiling faintly as though enjoying my fear. Its lips moved. This time I heard it. "It's your turn." A cold hand touched my shoulder from behind. I turned. The camera floated in the air, lens fixed on me, alive with hunger. The watchers gathered around it, past owners, their faces half familiar, broken by suffering and guilt. They spoke together, voices layered. Feed it, or join us. I shook my head, backing away, but the labyrinth bent around me, always bringing me back to the camera.
Its shutter clicked by itself. Pain stabbed into me, deeper than flesh. I felt memory rip free, moments pulled out. My first bike ride, my mother's smile, a night laughing with Tom. Pieces of me, gone.
"You thought you escaped," it whispered in my voice. "But the labyrinth never lets go." I dropped the camera, heart racing. But as I backed away, I saw movement in the window glass. The watchers were there, just for a second, then gone. Every reflective surface now feels alive. Mirrors, windows, even dark water. When I look too long, I see the labyrinth behind the glass, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the soft click of a shutter in the darkness. I tell myself not to pick the camera up again, but the hunger still whispers. And deep down I know it's only a matter of time. Darkness had become my companion. After that last photo, I wasn't sure if I was alive or something else. The world felt distant, colors dimmed, sounds muffled, food tasteless. The only thing that still felt real was the camera, always near, always hungry. The whispers grew louder, shaping into words that made sense and yet made me want to scream. They spoke of others, of men and women before me who had held the cursed lens, feeding it life to keep themselves safe, until it claimed them too. At night, in the edges of my vision, I saw them, pale silhouettes lurking behind curtains, reflected in windows. Faces blurred but familiar, as though the camera had kept pieces of them trapped inside. Their eyes seemed to plead and accuse at once. Driven by terror and fascination, I traced the camera's path through decades. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. In 1952, a war photographer named Alan Croft had owned it. His letters found in an auction trunk described nightmares of faceless soldiers and photos developing themselves, each new shot darker than the last. His final letter ended mid-sentence. In the 1970s, it passed to a woman named Miriam Lowe, who ran a portrait studio. Clients began dying weeks after sitting for her. One night she vanished, leaving behind only rows of photos, all subjects blurred into the same eyeless mask. The camera resurfaced again and again, passed in secret, or stolen by those desperate enough to ignore the rumors. And now, it had me. My own photos grew worse. Each new picture showed less of the real world and more of that shadow place behind the lens. A labyrinth of cracked mirrors, crooked corridors, and endless doorways. And always, always the watchers. Shapes that flickered closer every time. Once, while developing a photo, I saw my own face in it, staring back with a look of utter despair, mouth forming a word I couldn't read. Before I could tear the photo up, the whispers surged. Too late. Nights became a blur of fear and obsession. One evening, desperate, I stood by my window, the city lights flickering outside. I lifted the camera, telling myself it would be the last photo, proof of the truth or a final surrender. I pressed the shutter. In that instant, the world around me peeled away. I was standing in that labyrinth from my nightmares, the place behind the lens. Cold air stung my skin. The ground felt like glass underfoot. Mirrors stretched into darkness on all sides, cracked and dirty. Shapes moved inside them, shadows of people, or what was left of them. They watched me,
silent, accusing. Ahead, at the heart of the maze, stood a towering mirror. Its surface shimmered like black water. Drawn forward, I stepped closer. In the mirror, I saw myself, but not as I was now. Instead, it was the reflection that had haunted my photos, pale, empty-eyed, smiling faintly as though enjoying my fear. Its lips moved. This time, I heard it. "It's your turn." A cold hand touched my shoulder from behind. I turned. The camera floated in the air, lens fixed on me, alive with hunger. The watchers gathered around it, past owners, their faces half familiar, broken by suffering and guilt. They spoke together, voices layered. "Feed it or join us." I shook my head, backing away, but the labyrinth bent around me, always bringing me back to the camera. Its shutter clicked by itself. Pain stabbed into me, deeper than flesh. I felt memory rip free, moments pulled out, my first bike ride, my mother's smile, a night laughing with Tom. Pieces of me gone. My body grew heavier, colder. I fell to my knees, breath shallow. The watchers stepped closer, pressing around me. In that moment, I understood the camera never truly wanted photos. It wanted fear, guilt, memory. Each owner had fed it to stay alive until it hollowed them out completely. And when nothing was left, they became part of the labyrinth, the watchers. Rage flared in me. I forced myself up, staggering toward the floating camera. "If you want me, then take it all." I ripped the last photo I'd taken, the one of my empty-eyed self, and slammed it against the lens. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the labyrinth shattered like glass, a roar filling my head. I woke on my apartment floor, blood trickling from my nose. The camera lay beside me, cracked and dark. The whispers were gone. The watchers gone. For the first time in weeks, silence. Days passed. I tried to return to life, but something inside me was missing. My memories felt patchy, whole years fuzzy or lost. Faces of loved ones blurred in my mind. Food tasted of ash. Music sounded flat. I kept the broken camera locked in a box, too afraid to touch it, but unable to throw it away. One night, unable to sleep, I dug it out again. Its lens was cracked, but something shimmered behind the glass. A reflection. My reflection. Empty-eyed, smiling faintly.
"You thought you escaped," it whispered in my voice, "but the labyrinth never lets go." I dropped the camera, heart racing, but as I backed away, I saw movement in the window glass. The watchers were there, just for a second, then gone. Every reflective surface now feels alive. Mirrors, windows, even dark water. When I look too long, I see the labyrinth behind the glass, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the soft click of a shutter in the darkness. I tell myself not to pick the camera up again, but the hunger still whispers. And deep down, I know it's only a matter of time. I had hoped the curse would end once I escaped that room, but it followed me like a shadow that couldn't be outrun. Each day became a waking nightmare, each night a prison of restless fear. Mirrors, windows, even the glint of water in a puddle, All of them turned into gateways where I saw not my own reflection, but something darker, something alive. It watched me with cold amusement, as if it knew secrets about me that even I had forgotten. I stopped looking into mirrors at all, covering them with sheets and turning away whenever glass caught the light. But reflections can't be hidden forever. They wait, patient and silent, knowing that sooner or later everyone looks.
The whispers grew bolder. At first, they were like half-formed thoughts at the edge of hearing, but soon they began to sound like my own voice, echoing in my head late at night. They told me things I didn't want to remember, dredging up guilt and shame buried so deep I'd thought them forgotten. They accused me, mocked me, even pleaded with me to listen. Sometimes they whispered secrets that were true, things no one else could possibly know. And in those moments, I wondered if the darkness in the mirrors really belonged to me, or if it had always been part of me, waiting for the right moment to show itself. Then came the dreams, vivid, suffocating nightmares where I walked endless, cracked hallways lined with tarnished mirrors. In every reflection, a figure stalked me, just out of reach, its features shifting and melting into something worse each time I dared to look. One night, I awoke to find myself standing before a mirror I had boarded up, the boards ripped away and scattered around my feet. My hand was bleeding, and I realized I had been scratching at the glass as though trying to reach what lay beyond. The sight of my own wild-eyed reflection made me recoil. It felt like looking into the eyes of a stranger who hated me. The next morning, I tried to tell someone what was happening. My voice shook, and the words felt ridiculous as they left my mouth. But I needed someone to hear them, to make it real outside my own mind. The person I confided in just looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. That expression cut deeper than any blade, and I left before they could say anything else. After that, I stopped trying to explain. Some horrors can't be shared. They live in silence, feeding on the fear you don't speak aloud. The fear soon turned to dread, and the dread to something colder, acceptance. I began to realize that this was never just about the room or the mirrors. It was about me, about the darkness I had let grow inside without even knowing it. The reflections weren't showing me something foreign, they were showing me something true. Each time I denied it, the shadows grew stronger, as if nourished by my refusal to face what I was. And so I kept moving from place to place, hoping distance would weaken its hold. But you can't run from your own reflection. In every hotel room, every public restroom, every darkened shop window at night, I saw them, waiting. The figure that wasn't quite me, standing too still, its eyes black as wet ash. And always, just before I forced myself to look away, it would smile. A slow, knowing smile that told me the game wasn't over, that it had barely begun. As days blurred into nights and the world outside grew less real than the nightmare inside my head, I began to feel it, something pushing against the glass, testing it. Sometimes in my weakest moments, I felt the urge to help it, to break the mirror and reach through, to trade places and end this torment. And each time, I stopped myself at the last moment, driven not by courage, but by terror of what might happen if I failed. Now, as I write this, by the dim light of a single bulb, I can see it, even in the reflection of my own eyes. It's there, behind them, waiting, watching, and I know that soon it won't have to wait much longer, because fear can only hold back darkness so long, and mine is almost spent. After the nightmares had nearly driven me mad, I made one last attempt to end it all. I gathered every scrap of courage I had left and returned to the place where it had all started, the crumbling, rotting farmhouse deep in the marsh. It felt as though the walls themselves were breathing, soaked in the memory of my sins and the darkness I had unleashed. The air was thick with rot, and the boards creaked under my feet like dying whispers. I stood in what had once been the living room, now a shrine of my guilt, and shouted into the silence, begging the shadows to come and finish what they had started. But there was no answer, only the drip of water somewhere in the darkness, like the steady beat of a dying heart. That night I slept in the house, wrapped in the damp, moth-eaten remains of an old blanket. The dreams came again, but this time they were different. I saw her face clearer than ever, her eyes empty and yet burning with an impossible rage. She whispered words I couldn't understand, but they cut deeper than any knife. When I woke, there was a mark on my chest, a handprint, as if someone had pressed burning iron against my skin. The pain was real. It reminded me this was no mere illusion. The curse had followed me here, had marked me, and now it demanded its price. In the days that followed, I began to see them not only in my sleep, but in every reflection. Dark figures shifting behind me in cracked mirrors, in the slick surface of stagnant water, even in the glass of shop windows in town. They watched, patient, silent. But their intent was unmistakable. They were waiting for something. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My body was hollowed out by fear, but my mind was kept sharp by terror. Every reflection felt like a trap, a thin veil between me and the thing that wanted to pull me through. Desperate, I reached out to anyone who might help: priests, mystics, scholars of the occult. Some refused to even speak with me when they heard what had happened. Others tried to help, but every ritual, every prayer, every charm failed. Each failure made the shadows stronger, their whispers louder, and my own reflection stranger. Sometimes it didn't copy my movements. Sometimes it smiled when I did not. Sometimes it raised a hand when mine stayed still. It mocked me, as though it knew the truth I was too afraid to accept, that I was the source of this horror, and that escape was impossible. Then came the night I dared to look into the largest mirror I could find, hoping to confront whatever it was. What I saw nearly broke me. My reflection didn't just lag or smirk, it stepped forward, closer to the glass, while I stood frozen in place. Its eyes were empty holes, leaking a black mist that coiled across the mirror's surface. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. The reflection raised a hand to the glass and pressed its palm against it. The surface rippled like water, and for a single, eternal moment, I felt it pull at me, as though it was trying to drag me through to the other side. I staggered back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and smashed the mirror. The shards scattered across the floor, but in each one I still saw that same dark figure staring back. Shattering the glass had done nothing. If anything, it had made it worse. The curse was no longer tied to a single object. It had spread, like rot, through the walls of my mind. Now, as I write this, my reflection watches me from the black glass of the window. I see it shift, twitch, sometimes mouthing words I dare not hear.
I know what it wants, to take my place, to step into the world of flesh and leave me trapped forever in its cold, hollow prison. And the worst part, the truth I can't deny anymore, is that part of me wants it too, wants an end to this fear, this guilt, this endless night. But I also know that if I give in, whatever takes my place won't stop with me. It will go on, and no one will be safe. So I keep writing, because as long as I tell this story, I remain real. As long as someone hears it, I'm still here. And though I feel my strength fading, I have to finish, even if it's the last thing I do.
It all led to this moment. After nights spent pacing in rooms lit only by a single flickering bulb, after weeks of jumping in every reflection that caught my eye, I knew the end had finally come. The walls felt thinner, the air heavier, and even my own breath seemed to echo back at me from unseen mouths. I could hear them clearly now. Not whispers, but words, layered and overlapping, chanting truths I didn't want to hear. They didn't sound angry anymore. They sounded certain, as if what was coming had been inevitable from the start. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped pretending I could live like other people. The world outside faded into a gray blur of passing faces and meaningless noises. The only thing that felt real was the thing waiting behind the glass. It was in every surface that could catch a reflection: windows, polished floors, the dark water pooling in a cracked sink. And when I dared to look, it didn't hide anymore. It stood there, as calm and still as a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. One night, I gathered what little strength I had and smashed every mirror in the apartment. Shards flew everywhere, glittering in the moonlight like fragments of frozen nightmares. But in each jagged piece, I still saw it. Dozens of tiny reflections, all staring back at me with those same hollow, black eyes. I realized then that the glass was never the prison. The prison was me. The chanting grew louder. It seeped into my thoughts until I couldn't tell where my mind ended and theirs began. I felt it in my bones like a second heartbeat, pounding out a rhythm I couldn't resist. And in that rhythm there was a promise. If I let it in, the fear would stop. The pain would stop. All I had to do was give in. In the final moments, I found myself in front of the last intact mirror. My reflection looked nothing like me anymore. It was thinner, darker, and its mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach its eyes. And then it moved before I did. Just slightly, but enough. Enough to know it was free. I raised my hand to the glass, and it raised its own a beat too late. That tiny delay was enough to break whatever hope I had left.
The mirror began to ripple like water, and the air felt electric, sharp with cold. My ears rang with a single word, repeated again and again, not from outside, but from deep within me. Now. And in that moment, all the terror drained away, replaced by a calm so complete it felt like surrender. I don't remember stepping forward, but I do remember the feeling of falling, not into darkness, but into something colder and older than the night. On the other side, I wasn't me anymore. I was watching from inside the mirror as my reflection turned away, stretched, and smiled at the room behind it. It felt relief, freedom, satisfaction. Now I watched through the glass, seeing my own hands move without my will, hearing my own voice speak words I don't choose.
The thing that took my place lives my life better than I ever did. It laughs, it eats, it sleeps soundly, and no one around it seems to notice the difference. Why would they? Monsters wear familiar faces best of all. I wait here, trapped behind the cold, unblinking surface, with nothing but my own regrets and the echoes of that final chant for company. And sometimes, when it passes by, it pauses to look at me. Its eyes hold nothing but amusement and victory, and it leaves me with a single silent promise. It will never let me go. And so I remain, a prisoner in the mirror, forced to watch as the life that was once mine becomes something I no longer recognize. And the worst part is knowing that soon someone else will stand where I stood. Someone else will look into the glass and see something move that shouldn't. And when that moment comes, the cycle will begin again.